chapter 37. Like I said, I've been in the military, and I was in it for just over 21 years. And a lot of them have these specialized trainings, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go to one of them. And in the training, it's on resilience. That when something happens, it's how you react they're trying to control or trying to get a hold of. So for the example for that topic, they said a tennis ball. What happens when you bounce a tennis ball? It bounces back. What happens when you have an egg? It doesn't bounce, but it's rubber. But in this illustration, they said they want you to be the tennis ball. They want you to be the ball. Whatever happens in life, being able to bounce back, not falling down like an egg and cracking. So we're going to use the life of Joseph to show the illustration for someone who had bounced back. In our journey, in our Christian walk, we're going to have times of ups and downs. This journey we call life for the Christian is not an easy journey, but with God on our side, we will be able to bounce back. So we're going to look at Joseph's journey. And early in his life, he gets a dream from God, and God tells him that, hey, I've got something big for you. So if you'll join me in Genesis 37, starting in verse 5. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaf stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said unto him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. Behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him, and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. So here Joseph is given a dream of his future, that he's going to be reigning over his house. Now, how do we know if it's God or where God is calling us? In the Bible times, we hear how God communicates to mankind in words, visions, dreams, and through angels. Moses, he spoke of the burning bush. Jacob wrestled with an angel. We have different prophets. We have an angel speaking to a virgin, and then in a dream to her betrothed. And even Peter gets to sleepwalk right out of prison. Joseph doesn't know where he's going or how he's going to arrive at his calling, but he'll have to go on a journey. If he knew where he was going to have what was going to have to take place to get to that point, do you think he would have gone? If every journey is easy, anybody could do it. In Hebrews 12:1 says, "Let us run with patience the race that is set before us." In high school, I ran track for about a year and a half, and I enjoyed it. I loved running as a youth, and when I signed up in the high school to do track, they said, well, no one's doing hurdles, you're doing hurdles. I've never jumped over a hurdle before, not one in track, but in this journey that we go through, we're going to have hurdles to go through. Some of them are high hurdles, some of them are low hurdles. But in our Christian race, there will be hurdles that we're going to have to encounter. And I'm going to use Joseph's life to talk about three hurdles that he went through. The first hurdle, as we read, are those who were close to him. And verse 10 said that his brothers envied him, but his father rebuked him. And in verse 11, his brothers envied him yet the more, but his father observed the sayings. Who is Joseph? We read in the Bible, Joseph is nobody particularly special. He was the second youngest of 12 boys. Also, he was Daddy's favorite child, not because he was special, but because he was the oldest son of Jacob's favorite wife. And then to add insult to injury, his dad made him a special coat that made him stand out amongst the rest of his brothers. So when Joseph told his dream from God, his brothers, in verse 11 said, were more envious of him. And in verse 20, they had the opportunity to kill him. They said, hey, Dad sent him out to go check on the brother, see if there was any mischief going on. They saw him coming in from a distance, said, hey, here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and see what happens to his dream. But yet God spared him, and one of his brothers saw a pit, said, hey, let's not kill him, but throw him into this pit. He was hoping that he'd be able to take him safely to his father's house. But while he was gone, they, instead of killing him, they sold him into slavery. As a result, Joseph was purchased as a slave in a foreign country. He could have quit, but we see here that even in a foreign land, Joseph did not let the bad influence him negatively. He bounced back like the ball. If we read in chapter 39, verse 1, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in his house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all things he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had put into his hands. And it came to pass, from the time that he had made him overseer of his house, and over all that he had, and the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon him, upon all that he had in his house and in the field. So Joseph, when he was sold into this foreign land that he's never been into, he didn't let the circumstances keep him down. Just like the ball, he bounced back. In racing, once you've cleared one hurdle, sometimes you might be out of step, but you need to get back in step because right in front of you is another hurdle. The second hurdle I want to look at is those that are the liars in our life. In chapter 39, we read that he is betrayed and lied about. Joseph was serving God where God had placed him, and God gave him favor in his boss's eyes. When the opportunity came for him to get out of step, he stayed faithful to God. Verse 8 of chapter 39 says, this Potiphar's wife tried to lie with him, but he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, my master wrought not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? He was not worried about what others would do to him. He was worried about one thing, and that is being faithful in God's eyes. So it wasn't the human aspect that scared him, saying, the human body said, take it, but he said, what, I want to be faithful to God. I don't want to do what's wrong in God's eyes. But yet, he was still, from this, the wife was able to persuade her husband, lie about this situation, and had Joseph thrown into prison. Verse 19, and it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled, and Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. So here Joseph was in a high position, and because of liars, he was thrown into prison. And if anybody knows the prisons of that time, it's not like what we have nowadays where you have snack time and roam in the park and roam the fields and have an exercise. They were in prison. They were almost underground. And if anybody, somebody recently told us that in like Rome and places like there, when the prisons are underground and it gets heavy rain, that's where the septic comes up out of. So here Joseph is now in the worst place that any human being can be. So here Joseph could say, okay, that's it. I was betrayed by my brothers. I had a good paying job that didn't pay out. I'm done. But did he quit? We don't read that he quit. He bounced back. As a result, because he loved God and God was with him, even in prison, he found favor with the captain of the guards. Verse 21, verse of chapter 39. But the Lord was with Joseph and shewed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So even in prison, because he didn't give up, because he didn't say, you know what, I'm just a broken egg, I'm staying on the ground, but because he was a tennis ball, he bounced back. And in prison, God still showed him favor. When you're running in hurdles, there's going to be times where you're going to trip over a hurdle. I've tripped over quite a few hurdles in a race, and it's not fun because it kind of hurts when you hit that ground. But it's all part of the race. The key thing is, the goal is not to stay down, but to get up and finish the race. The third hurdle I want to look at is the low points. Here Joseph's at probably one of the most lowest points of his life, in prison, where he's once daddy's favorite. Then he was sold in slavery, put a high position in Egypt. Now he's in prison. But here in prison, he's staying faithful to God. And at one point, 2 officers of Pharaoh were thrown into prison. One is the chief baker and the other chief butler. And here in prison, they both have a dream, and Joseph's able to interpret the dream with God's help. And Joseph was able to interpret the dream. One would live and the other would die. Joseph had asked the butler that when he was restored to his position, that he would let the Pharaoh know his story. If we read chapter 40, verse 23, it says, "Yet did the chief baker remember Joseph, but forgot him." So in this low state, Joseph could have said, nobody likes me, everybody hates me, I might as well eat worms. But did Joseph give up? As far as we know, he stayed faithful. He bounced back. Because Joseph did not give up on God, God did not give up on him. Once you've cleared all the hurdles, your race is not over. There's still that finish line that you've got to cross. Hebrews 12:2 says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. And after this point, Joseph now is going to get into his ministry. Because God called him to a high position. And he thought it might have been in Potiphar's house, but God had a better spot for him. Chapter 41, verse 1 said, "It came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river." So at least 2 years he's been still in prison after the baker, or after the butler has been restored. He's been in prison and forgotten about for these last 2 years. And then Pharaoh gives his dream, and there's no one able to interpret it. And then verse 9 of chapter 41 says, "Then spake the chief butler to Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my fault this day." Go down to verse 12. "And there was he explains about his dream and the bakers. "And there was with us a young man, a Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream did he interpret. It came to pass, as he interpreted to us, it was so. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged." And so Pharaoh said, "Bring him here." So after getting him all cleaned up and ready to be presented in front of Pharaoh, Joseph appears before Pharaoh, and verses 25 through 32, Joseph interprets the dream for Pharaoh. 33 through 36, Joseph proposed a plan. And we're going to catch up right here in verse 37 of chapter 41. "And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a man as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God has showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. And thou shalt be over my house. According to thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only the throne will I be greater than thou. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt." So here now Joseph's raised to the highest position in Egypt other than being Pharaoh. And for someone who is not an Egyptian, this is an honor. But here Joseph is getting to the position, he doesn't know that's where God called him yet, but he knew it was something high. But there was things that Joseph had to learn along this journey. Before Joseph could be a great leader, he had to learn to serve. In the military, we have a lot of commanders that we got to listen to. But if you ask any of the enlisted rank, the easiest ones to obey and to follow are those that came up through the ranks. Those that had learned to serve before they had to be served. I don't know if Joseph knew it, but he was also learning humility. In Proverbs 24:16 says, "For a just man falleth 7 times, and riseth up again, but the wicked shall fall into mischief. Like the egg, the wicked stays down, But not only that, they try to drag us down, drag you down. But it says the just shall rise again, shall bounce back. And then chapter 42 is where he finally gets to see where God has said, hey, I'm going to put you up, and your brothers are going to bow down to you. In chapter 42, starting in verse 6, and Joseph was a governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself stranger to them, and spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, Whence come ye? And they said, From a land of Canaan to buy food. And Joseph knew his brothers, but they knew him not. And verse 9 says, And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them. So everything that God had showed him about how his brothers were going to bow down to him, Joseph gets to see that come to fruition. But one of the things that he had to learn also in Genesis chapter 50, in verse 19, is forgiveness. Because his brothers betrayed him. If his brothers would have left him alone, he would never have to go through all these ups and downs in his life. But verse 19 of chapter 50 said, And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? Here he's before his brothers. His brothers think, Dad had just passed away. The brothers thought, Dad's protection's gone. Now Joseph's in charge, and he's going to give us back what we gave to him. But verse 20 says, But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring it to pass as it is this day, to save much people. What they thought was going to be a horrible thing, what Joseph's life had to go through, but he said God had meant it to good. Joseph had to forgive his brothers. We have another example, and that's Job. If God would have gone to Job and said, Hey, Job, I'm going to put you through a test. You will lose all your wealth, your children, your health. I'm going to let your best friends become miserable comforters to you. But afterwards, I'm going to give you double that which you started. What do you think Job would have said? What would we have said? Next guy, please. Because the trouble that he went through was what God was allowing him to go through. And God's going to allow us to go through hurdles in our lives. But after Job was tested, both times he was tested, Job 1:22 says, In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. And then Job 2:10 says, In all this did Job not sin with his lips. Like Joseph, Job bounced back. He didn't stay down. He was down for a great while, but you know what? He got his strength back, and he bounced back. But after the test of Job, God goes to his miserable friends, and Job 42 verse 7 says, And it was so that after the Lord had spoke these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, My wrath is kindled against thee and against thy two friends, for ye have not spoken of me the things that is right, as my servant Job hath. So God just told his friends, what Job just went through, I'm going to make you go through. But we read a little further on in verse 10, And the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. Because Job prayed for his friends who were not so well helping him through this time of crisis, God said, you know what? You forgave them, I forgive them. But Job had to learn forgiveness just like Joseph. We have to learn forgiveness for people that offend us. But one thing we must remember, that God's in control. Everything we go through, God's in control. God communicates to each and every one of us. Psalms 37:4 says, Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of thy heart. When I was in high school, if you asked me when I was in my 11th grade what my path was going to be in life, I knew at the age of 15 God had called me to minister. I thought it was to be a pastor. At the age of 17, I joined the military. Why? Because they promised me money for school. My dad was in the military. I was going to follow in his footsteps. They promised me money for school because if you guys ever looked at Bible college, it's expensive. Montgomery GI Bill doesn't cover most of the Bible colleges, but I could have gotten to junior college, save up some money, and then been able to save that and put it towards Bible college. So that was my plan. Join the military 4 years, get out, go to Bible college, become a pastor someplace. But after multiple attempts of trying to leave the military, God allowed me to retire. I didn't know what God was going to do to me until I was in my 30s, where I was going to go for my journey. If you want to serve God wherever and whenever, we need to start serving Him now here in our church, here in this church. When we moved from California to Arkansas, we thought God was going to have us start something there, but we needed to move out of California because economically we were drowning. We moved to Arkansas, got our finances up, but within the first year of us moving out to Arkansas, our church doors in California closed their doors. So we were missionaries without a sending church. But we worked with Pastor Bernard, and we were able to send out of his church. But it was about 5 years before we got that position. But what was I supposed to do? So while I was there, whatever the church needed, I did. Came to the children's church director. Still am, trying to find a replacement. But you know what? I'm where God put me. And you know what? I was staying faithful to where God put me, even in this time of pausing for ministry. Like I said, we need to start serving Him now, wherever He has us. Here in the church, I bet there's needs you can ask the pastor for, and there's room. In conclusion, looking forward, it's hard to see what's going to happen. But as Joseph saw, when he looked back, like when I look back, I can see that God was with us every step of the way. Like Joseph said in Genesis 50:20, but as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good. God was with Joseph every step of the way. Most of us are familiar with the poem Footprints in the Sand. It talks about someone who's on a journey with God, and when they looked back, they saw that most of the time there was 2 sets of footprints, but in the hardest times there was only 1 set. And they said to God, why did you leave me? When I was down and out, why did you leave me all alone walking this path? And God looks back and looks at them and says, at those times where you see 1 set of footprints, it was at that time I was carrying you. One more verse that I'd like you to go to is Psalms 119, verse 165. Psalms 119, 165. This is a verse that when I found it, God has used it to help me to bounce back. Psalms 119, 165. Great peace have they which love thy law. The last part, and nothing shall offend them. When you have peace in God and in His Word, and you trust in Him with faith, nothing's going to offend us. When you're secure in God's Word, nothing will offend us. Not our friends, our family, nor our foes, nor those that are close to us, liars, or our low points. As the pianist plays and the pastor comes, I want to start invitation, and I want to encourage you in your Christian journey that no matter where you go, what you do, you're going to have hurdles, and you will be distracted or you'll even fall, but be the ball, bounce back. The Bible says the